live in the studio. The program is stationed at WLCN up here in Lazy Row in Atlanta, Illinois. Our guest this morning, Viewpoint, is the former Logan County Fair Queen, now a prominent attorney in Logan County, Natalie Marquez. We're talking about law, but primarily today agricultural law. I'd like to raise a question about water rights. I presume, not very smartly, by the way, that that is not as big a thing here as it is out in folks out west.
That is where a lot of the laws, I believe, stem from. Mm-hmm. You're absolutely
water
right.
rights were just so integral to everybody's day-to-day operation out there.
Oh my! Oh,
I have a
course.
cousin who practiced law in Billings, Montana, and gone now, unfortunately. He told me at one time that water rights was a major portion of his practice.
That doesn't surprise me a bit. We also refer to it as riparian rights, and everyone has neighbors, and what do I do when I have got water streaming across my land from my neighbor who is up on the hill?
Mm-hmm. Riparian rights, is that what that's?
Right, right. And there are all sorts of rules, common law rules, we refer to them, that govern that type of thing. When can you put up some sort of a barrier and keep that water off your land, and when is that the wrong thing to do? So it's a complex area, and we haven't done a lot of that, and I haven't seen a lot of that in our practice. But it certainly doesn't mean that we couldn't navigate those waters if the issue presented itself.
Yeah.
What seems to be in this area?
Some fun, by the way.
In central Illinois, what seems to be the most contentious area of law as far as agriculture is concerned? Would it be leases? It's not water.
Well,
would it be marketing? What is it?
No, I would say that when you get into the farm leases, or when you've got a boundary issue, that's not common only to farmers. That is common across the board. We see a lot of boundary line disputes. We see a lot of issues when someone is going to be buying land that belongs to another that already has an existing cash rent tenant on it. Do we have to keep that tenant on the ground? Are we obligated, or can we get that tenant off and put our own tenant on? And we address those issues. A lot of times the answer to that stems from what kind of lease is in place. Again, is it a verbal lease? Is it a written lease?
Go back to contracts,
right. Mm-hmm. Where the terms dictate, how that's going to play out. So I would say that's what we've seen the most in our practice. Primarily, when we have farmers coming in, they're looking to utilize us for some of their estate planning. The great wealth that our farmers have right now in terms of the land values, that has really bridged over into our healthcare practice to some extent, because people are wanting to shelter those assets to a certain degree so that the government can't tap into them. They want to preserve their wealth for future generations, and the ways to do that often are through sophisticated trust documents. So we guide farmers in dynasty trust, generation skipping trusts. We affiliate with CPAs to help us do that in the right way, so that we can maintain wealth in our communities rather than see it possibly go by the wayside, so to speak.
Well, that's common, though, across the board. Everyone wants to do what they're supposed to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe not everyone.
I
was
think
pushing
you might
the envelope a little bit there.
Just
but
maybe
most of us really want to do our fair share. But on the other hand, it comes to pass that Bill and I got older than you did, for the simple fact that we were born before you were. Now, that was brilliant. Brilliant.
Provocative. Profound.
Absolutely.
So you want to keep enough of what you've worked for so that you can get old.
Yeah, that is absolutely right. And
Now, surely guiding and guarding that
Mhm.
has got to be a darn big job. And then you think of survivorship,
oh, right.
that I would think would be something else, because if you give to each of the nieces and nephews and somebody gets left out or what have you.
Well, planning is essential to our society, I think. I mean, we plan our days. We get up in the morning and we put a plan together about how we're going to conquer our day. It would seem to follow then with something that valuable, such as our farmland or our valuables, that people are going to want to plan. I am often surprised how many people come in that are older than I am, and they have yet to plan. They have yet to put their estate plans together. And going back to what you had mentioned before, because our laws have changed so often and in such a rapid fashion, people are scrambling, in fact, now I've accumulated my wealth, and I want to preserve it, and I don't have nursing home insurance, and if I have to apply to Medicaid, are they going to be able to, take my land, and am I going to have to sell this in order to sustain myself when I get into a facility of some sort? And these are real concerns that we see with our clients on a daily basis. And what I think when I leave the office is, wow, we need to see more young people coming in and addressing these things much earlier.
Thinking ahead.
That's right.
But you see, youth always thinks it's immortal.
That's right. Yeah, and that's one of the great things about being young, too.
Well, that doesn't extend just to youth.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned, and I said early on in the show, the phrase "little things mean a lot." Apropos of precise planning and so on, I say I know of a fellow who owned a piece of real estate that was leased to a filling station, American Oil, Standard Oil in New Jersey at the time.
Gosh.
And the fellow's attorney, Bill Bates Sr.,
Oh, wonderful.
wrote into the lease that they would be responsible for any causes or actions as a result of their occupying the premises. Those few words saved my bacon when they abandoned the place and the tanks had to come out and so forth. So it's such a little thing like that. Attention
Absolutely.
to detail.
That is exactly
Would
it,
have meant
and that is a hallmark.
thousands upon thousands upon
Yes.
thousands of dollars to me.
And that is the hallmark of good attorneys.
Right.
I mean, that is what I was reflecting on before. When attorneys especially, are drafting contracts, they are generally apprised already of what the issues are that become contentious down the road if they're not addressed in contracts. So that's a perfect example. That's what we try to do on a daily basis, help people in these regards avoid their problems rather than dealing with problems as they walk through the door.
That goes back to the old saying, representing yourself, you have a fool for a client.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Had I negotiated that lease on my own, would never come up.
Oh, I agree with you. You reminded me, we mentioned my grandfather Folk, and I feel remiss now that you've mentioned oil not to mention my grandfather Bon, who had a gas station over in Chestnut for a number of years.
Billy Randolph said Chetnut.
Chestnut, which is, right in the smack center of Illinois.
Yes, it is, geographic.
I learned, wow, that's something.
That's
But he had a gas station over there, and I remember the story at one point. Gene Burwell had approached Albert, my grandfather, Albert Bond, and wanted to merge together at that point, and him being so conservative at that time, and having 3 young daughters and a wife, he said, no, not going to do that. And
interesting.
Look, we could have had a dynasty. I look at Kurt Burwell and I think, gee whiz.
Roll of the dice.
Yeah.
Well, the decision
He and I
made
went to school together.
The
by the way, Kurt.
the decision he made at that time was, by his definition, in his own best interest.
Oh, of course.
Sure,
And
yeah.
that goes right in line with that day and age, I think. You know, I mean, he wasn't a big risk taker, much more conservative.
Well, and it goes with our area too.
Absolutely.
We're not flaming liberals, you know.
Mhm.
I
Oh,
mean,
sure.
you'd have to go a little farther east to get that.
Amen.
That's
that.
right. That's right. Yeah.
Fair and unbalanced we are.
Oh, good. So I said it right earlier on the majority staff. That was the Republican side. I guess I better plug that hard, huh?
Viewpoint's known for being fair and unbalanced, not fair and balanced like Fox.
Oh, I see. I see.
You know, we mentioned earlier the business of so-called riparian rights. You know, we stop to think back a minute, ecologically and so forth. Way back when Elmer was sheriff, and even way back before that, when I was a little kid on farm out at Burtonview, if you'll recall, hedgerows delineated the difference in the farm properties. That was very common.
Sure.
Well, in the interest of getting more crops and so forth, the hedgerows started to come out, and as a consequence, they came all across the country, you know. And so what was on my property soon washed over into your property, and so on and so forth. So it made a huge ecological difference in a lot of topography
certainly.
around here.
Oh, that is certain. One of the things I remember from law school and involving riparian rights and water rights, and you know, this is not any kind of legal advice by any means, but it was often it was a bar exam question as well, because it is contradictory to what we would typically think is the right answer, and that's why they tested you on it.
Sure.
But if I recall, there was no duty for the landowner that had a dominant estate and had water flowing onto the land of another to do anything about it. It was just let it flood.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and it's been a while. I've been out of law school now 13 years, so I don't want anyone quoting me on that, and I'm not suggesting that anyone just let the water run onto their neighbor's land, but there was some real interesting case law that came out of riparian right. And
Have you had an unusual, without getting into any personalities or something like that, but have you had any unusual experiences in your practice that come to mind in your short time with
not
us back in
involving
Logan
water,
County?
no. I'm trying to think if we've had anything that's been worthy of mentioning on the air anyway. I have to be
Yeah.
real careful with that, too.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
Give too many details, and sure enough, I'm going to have someone beating on my door when I get back to the office. You know, everything's been pretty mainstream.
How about mineral rights? Is that ever an issue around here? You know, what if my farm, in a
It
perfect
is.
world, abutted Bill's farm, and there was some natural resource found on mine? How do you do that?
Well, there's a lot that goes into that, and a lot of times title searches are involved because we have to go back and see who actually owns the mineral rights, how far down we're going to go in that. That has become a very hot issue with this fracking that has really started in the southern part of the state and in Ohio. And for those out there that don't know what fracking is, that is, you know, tiling, essentially, going down into the earth and, you know, extracting minerals through the fracking process. But that is the process involved. You know, going into the county records and pulling the title searches to see just who owns what and how far back, so that we can determine who has the rights to those minerals. Generally, it's the current and present landowner. They own what's above and beneath their land for the most part. And there's always exceptions to every rule, just like everything else. But generally, if you're the due owner of the ground, you own up to the sky and down to what's
China.
underneath. That's right.
Well, do leases ever enter into that issue?
Not that I have seen, but I would not discount that as a possibility. But a lease does not give you ownership in land. It gives you possession to conduct either activity on the land or temporary
But could I go in
living
and just
arrangements.
dig up the farm ground that the person is leasing from me and ruin his opportunity to have any crop because I want to get to what's underneath the ground,
I see
somewhere
what you're
between here
saying.
and China?
So what you're saying is you have a current tenant on your ground.
Right.
And at this point, you would like to come in and disrupt the current lease arrangement in order to extract minerals beneath your ground.
Right.
There's a lot of things that come into play when analyzing that question. One, you'd want to look at the lease. And hopefully, going back to what we've talked about before, if that was a contemplation back when, that would have been written in there that if the owner needs to come onto the land in order to extract minerals from underneath, that you would have the opportunity to do that. So the first place to go is to the lease and see what that says. And after that, it gets fairly complicated. But I think we need a much longer show for that.
Well, as I figured, once again, Judith Kay, the clock has done what it inexorably does. It moves around to 9 o'clock. We're happy to have had Mrs. Marquez with us today. Happily here in Logan County, we don't have the practice that we see on the TV all the time, the ambulance chasers, who give your profession a really kind of a bad name.
I
mean, you get you people who are honorable lawyers, as we enjoy here in Logan County. They must kind of cringe at that. But nonetheless, is it 10 o'clock yet? I'll get to pontificating here on that.
Well, Logan County is really the place to come and practice when you think about it. We've had great local attorneys that have gone on to be great local judges, that have gone on to be great appellate judges. You got Justice Turner, you got Justice Harris, Judge McCullough. I mean, it's an honor to be here.
Well, we're happy to have had you with us this morning.
you.
We always try to close a program with thumbs up. Boy, did I find a lot of lawyer quotes. But in the interest and deference to not only Natalie Folk Marquez, but all of my friends who are lawyers, I decided not to employ any of them. But I did find one about law. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. Unfortunately, that also applies to math, history, and geometry.
There you go.
Thank you for Viewpoint.
I like that.